Hi everyone and welcome back. So the last video we were talking about varnish. I didn't know anything about varnish, so we did a deep dive into that. And this video we're going to be talking about lacquering that was used on these two instruments by Rock Huang, and which is very unique. It's not something that we usually use on violins. So we're going to get straight into it. Very first thing, what is the difference between lacquer and varnish? Generally, varnish is a resin-based finish that we've been looking at inside and out, and lacquer is solvent-based and very quick to dry. The particular sort of lacquer we're looking at with Su and Huang's violins is natural lacquer, which is harvested straight from lacquer trees. And this is also known as urushi in Japanese. It's a specifically Asian thing, and when you think of the coating on chopsticks, bowls, a lot of furniture, that's what we're talking about. So the lacquer here is tinted and then built up over hundreds and hundreds of coats of lacquer and then hand carved. And I know obviously I need to clean them. I found them in my dad's closet after building up dust for a decade. But this is natural lacquer, and it is not to be confused with the more modern chemical-based lacquers. So these lacquer trees thrive in Taiwan because they really need a humid environment, 70 to 80%. So the subtropics are perfect for it. In fact, during the Japanese occupation of Taiwan in the 1920s, they tried to propagate traditional Japanese lacquer trees, but this failed due to the climate. Japanese climate is not subtropical. Instead, the Annam lacquer tree was used, which is native to Vietnam with a similar subtropical climate. The Latin name for the tree is Toxicodendron vernicifluum. And already with a name that starts with toxic, we have some questions starting. So yes, the sap is toxic. In fact, the oil that is derived from the lacquer tree is the same oil, also called urushio, found in poison ivy and poison oak that gives these terrible rashes. So the sap is collected, filtered, heat treated, and optionally colored before painting it on. This stuff can be really nasty though. Even in its liquid state, and the vapors coming from it can cause really severe rashes. It's actually really interesting how this stuff is approached. In China, the earliest proof of lacquering is dated back to the 12th century BCE, and the art form continues to this day. In Europe, where the material found its way through trade in the 1700s, the artisans gave up on it very quickly because it was incredibly difficult to get a hold of. The liquid lacquer tended to completely harden into a lump before it could actually be used for anything. And so, of course, they couldn't compete with thousands of years of Asian artisans. So this ended up making an extremely profitable trade for especially the Japanese. In fact, the Japanese realized this and beginning in the 1600s started to make cabinets and other furniture in a more Western style to appeal to the traders. Actually, these were specifically called Nanban, which translates to Southern Barbarian, referring to the Dutch and Portuguese traders that were coming in from the south. Think the Dutch East India Company. So I mentioned you can get rashes from even the vapors, but these rashes can also develop into sores, and there's no sort of immunity you can build up by working with this. The most severe reactions can even last a full month. I have a quote from lacquer artisan Chen Huoqing, who is in his 80s now, and he totally laughs at this stuff. He says, "I had a Japanese apprentice, and his face was swollen badly from lacquer exposure. His father came to visit, and he didn't recognize his son at all. Another time, a young lady was learning from me and suffered from lacquer poisoning, which made her eyelids swell significantly. Once the swelling went down, her previously single eyelid became double, which is how I comforted her." And of course, to me, this is totally crazy, but I guess you just have to be really dedicated to your art. And for those of you who don't know, we Asians love a double eyelid. It makes our eyes look bigger. There's a surgery for it. It's a whole thing. Moving on. The idea that Su and Huang have about natural lacquer on instruments as opposed to varnish is this. Natural lacquer is flexible, yet resilient enough to not chip or crack easily. Lacquer adheres tightly to the wood of an instrument without the need for a ground, each layer, as it was artfully explained to me, resembling the wing of a cicada. And with around 30 layers of coating, the inner layers amplify the vibrations to the outer layers and thus allows the sound to speak more clearly. Comparatively, oil and spirit-based varnishes lack flexibility and are thus more prone to chipping. Lacquer is also famously uncorrodable, so to speak. And that's why some of the oldest existing lacquerware is over 7,000 years old and still in really good condition. Natural lacquer is, in essence, nature's form of plastic. So that's the basic idea and where this is all coming from. Now that we've looked at all three of these techniques, I'll end with this excellent quote from Nicolas Lupeau, who I mentioned in the previous video. "A violin in the white only produces sounds that are raw and sharp. Moreover, the violin would begin decaying immediately if the placing on and the spreading of an unctuous liquid did not defeat it from the intemperance of the seasons, and above all from the perspiration of the player. But this obligatory covering should not have a muting effect on the instrument. Then while an adhesive ground and then a certain number of coats of varnish are indispensable for the protection of the wood, it is necessary to see that its constitution is perfectly tempered. It must tend to be rather lighter than heavy-handed. It must be nourishing to the materials without masking their force and energy, and should make the sound response sweeter without obstructing it. It is not worth the effort to have taken precautions with compass in order to nullify them with a sorry commodity like ill-conceived varnish. Enamel it as much as you find agreeable, but don't mute it." In the next video, I'll be playing Huang's 2 violins he sent me, so you can hear for yourselves how natural lacquer might affect the sound. So I hope you've enjoyed this very deep dive into the particulars of violin making. I never thought I would know this much about varnish and lacquering, but that's one of the very best parts of YouTubing. You end up learning so much about the randomest things. So if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe, give us a thumbs up, or leave a comment. Till next time, cheers!